This story is titled, My Parents Disowned Me for Not Being Their Biological Child. Now I've inherited money, and they're back. So, I was 14 when my whole life flipped. My mom, after a string of so-called dating experiments, met Bill. He was this loud, know-it-all type, and she fell for him pretty quick. And of course, it wasn't just him. Bill had a son, Ryan, who was 17 at the time. Now, I didn't expect us to hit it off or anything, but I also didn't expect them to basically come in and start treating the place like it was theirs from day one. But that's exactly what happened. The second they moved in, it was like my mom and I barely mattered. The funny part was, before Bill and Ryan, my mom and I were tight. It was just us, and we made it work. We didn't have much, but I didn't mind, you know? Things were simple, I had my space, and we got by. But then, the second Bill and Ryan set foot in our house, everything changed. Suddenly, I was like this outsider in my own home, and Bill had all these house rules that only seemed to apply to me. It started small, like those little annoyances that build up until you can't stand them anymore. Ryan, for one, used my shampoo like it was his personal bottle. I'd buy a bottle, and 2 days later, it was half gone, which was annoying as hell because I was the one paying for it. I brought it up to my mom, and she just brushed it off like, oh, Ryan's just getting used to having a sibling around. Yeah, right. More like he was getting used to having someone else cover his costs. Then, there was the kitchen. I'd come down in the morning, and the sink would be piled with dishes. But guess who'd get the lecture about keeping the place clean? Mr. I was the one who had to stay up late, scrubbing pots and pans from Bill's famous spaghetti night, while they all chilled out in the living room watching TV. It felt like everything wrong in that house was my fault. Didn't matter who actually made the mess, somehow, it always circled back to me. And I'll be honest, it wasn't just Ryan and his shampoo-thieving ways that got to me. Bill was even worse. He had this way of looking at me like I was always up to something, like I was just waiting to cause trouble. Anytime something went wrong in the house, a lost remote, a broken mug, you name it, he'd give me this look, like he was waiting for me to confess. And if I dared stand up for myself, he'd make some comment about how disrespectful kids are these days, as if he'd done me some grand favor by marrying my mom. And my mom? She was no help. I don't know if she was just blind to it all, or if she genuinely thought I needed to make an effort, but she'd always cover for them. I'd say, Mom, they're making me do all the cleaning. And she'd just be like, well, we're all family now. We have to make things work. Right. Except it was only me who had to make it work. She was too focused on this fantasy of us being this big, happy family to see how I was getting pushed out. About a year in, she and Bill dropped the big news. They were having a baby. Everyone was thrilled, especially Bill, who went on and on about how the family was growing. My mom seemed to think it was going to bring us all closer together. But to me, it just felt like another way I was being pushed further out. And I was right. Because guess which room became the nursery? Yep, mine. I got moved into this tiny, cramped guest room that barely fit my bed and a dresser. I had no privacy, no space, and it felt like a huge slap in the face. They didn't even ask me. They just told me, like I was some tenant being moved around. It was like they were saying, this is our family now. You're just the kid who tags along. Then, when my new half-brother Max was born, everything revolved around him. Max this, Max that. Every day it was something new. Renovating this, buying that. Meanwhile, I was just there in the background, dealing with all the changes while they played house. Max was the star of the show, and I was just there. I tried to be happy for my mom, but it was hard when it felt like I was being phased out of my own family. Ryan took it as his cue to go full big brother mode, which basically meant acting like he owned the place. Not long after Max was born, Ryan dropped out of college and moved back home. Instead of picking up a job or, doing anything remotely responsible, he treated the place like his personal party pad. He'd have friends over all the time, music blasting, garbage left everywhere, and he didn't care. And neither did Bill. Anytime I tried to bring it up, Bill would just shrug and say, boys will be boys. My mom would give me this sad look like, what can we do? I don't know, maybe set some rules? I started spending as much time away from home as possible. School became my escape, and I joined every club I could just to have somewhere else to be. I stayed after school for hours, just to avoid going home to the chaos. It wasn't even about teenage rebellion. It was survival. Home felt like this minefield, where I was always one step away from getting chewed out for something stupid. It was exhausting. One night I came home late from a study group, hoping to sneak in quietly and just go to bed. But when I walked in, the house was dead silent. I checked the fridge for something to eat and found a note on the door. Went out to dinner, be back later. They'd all gone out without me. No text, no heads up, nothing. Just a cold note on the fridge like I didn't even matter. I stood there staring at it, feeling like someone had punched me in the gut. It was a small thing, but it hit hard. It was like they didn't even care if I was part of the family or not. And that's how it was from then on. Me, just an afterthought in their perfect family picture. They didn't need me, didn't want me. I was just the extra kid who got stuck on the sidelines. And the worst part? My mom saw it too, and she just let it happen. She was too busy playing house with Bill to notice that I was slipping away. Looking back, I realized that was when I really started pulling away from them. The note on the fridge, the ignored complaints, the constant reminder that I was just not part of this new family. It sucked, but I stopped caring. I knew then that I was on my own. And honestly, it was probably better that way. By the time I hit 18, I was done. I mean, really done. Living in that house was like being the odd one out 24/7, and I knew I had to get out. I'd been saving every penny from my part-time job, hoping to make enough to rent a place close to campus. It wasn't much, but it was my ticket to freedom. Problem was, my mom and Bill acted like my job was just some cute hobby. Anytime I'd come home from a shift, Bill would throw in comments like, "School should be your focus," or "You need to be here with family." Yeah, right. Like they ever actually wanted me around. Things hit a new low on one random Friday night. I was at work, busting my ass to save up, and when I got home, the house was a total disaster. I mean, like a tornado had ripped through it. Empty bottles, pizza boxes, and the smell. Let's just say it was like a mix of booze, trash, and stale food. I went upstairs, hoping my room was safe, but nope. My door was wide open, and my room looked like it had hosted a frat party. My bed was covered in stains. Don't even want to know what kind. A lamp was smashed, and my notebooks and projects were scattered across the floor, some of them ruined. Ryan, genius that he is, had decided my room was the perfect place to entertain his friends while I was at work. He didn't even try to hide it. His jacket was draped over my chair, and there was a stack of beer bottles under my desk. I was livid. This was my space, my little corner of the house, and he'd treated it like a public restroom. The next morning, I went downstairs, absolutely fuming. Bill, my mom, and Ryan were all having breakfast like it was just another day. I didn't even sit down. I just went off. I said, "What the hell, Ryan? You used my room as your personal party zone while I was working?" Ryan just shrugged, gave this lazy grin, and said, "Chill out. It's not a big deal. We cleaned up." Cleaned up? Yeah, right. His idea of cleaning was probably shoving stuff under the bed and calling it a day. Then Bill piped up, and he's all, "You need to be more responsible with your belongings. If you don't want people touching your stuff, you should keep it locked up." Seriously? I was supposed to lock up my own bedroom in my own house because his kid had no respect for boundaries? My mom just gave me this sad look like she wished I'd drop it. She didn't say anything, just sighed and mumbled, "Let's not turn this into a big deal." But it was a big deal. My room was trashed, and they didn't even care. After that, I started counting the days until I could leave. I was working extra shifts, taking on every possible hour I could, just so I'd have enough to cover a deposit and a couple of months' rent. I barely slept, barely ate, and every time I was home, it felt like walking on eggshells. Bill would complain about me being too independent. My mom would look disappointed, and Ryan just went on living like he owned the place, partying, mooching off my mom and Bill, and doing whatever the hell he wanted. Then came the last straw, this moment that completely broke me. I had this big science project I'd been working on for weeks. It was important, one of the few things I actually cared about at school, and I needed to get it done without interruptions. I set up in the living room where I thought I'd have a bit of space. But of course, the whole house treated it like I was just sitting there doing nothing. Ryan came in, blasting his music, practically yelling on the phone to one of his friends about plans for the weekend. Max, my little half-brother, was running around screaming his head off, and Bill was telling me to pick up because apparently my project was taking up too much space. They acted like I was in the way, like my work didn't matter. So I packed up my stuff and headed to a friend's house to finish the project there. Her parents let me set up in their dining room, and for the first time in forever, I had some peace. That was when it hit me. My home life wasn't just bad, it was toxic. My friend's family didn't make me feel like a burden. Her parents just offered me space, no questions asked. It was a small thing, but it meant everything to me. I finally realized how screwed up my situation was. My own family treated me like an outsider, but here I was at a friend's place, actually feeling like I belonged. It was messed up. By then, I had enough money saved to start looking at apartments. They weren't much, Small, old, and a bit far from campus. But they were mine. I could finally get out. I found a place that was affordable, put down the deposit, and planned my move. I wasn't even going to tell my mom and Bill until the last minute, because I knew they'd try to talk me out of it or make me feel guilty. But part of me wanted them to see how fed up I was, to finally get it through their heads that they'd pushed me too far. One night after dinner, I sat them down at the kitchen table. My heart was pounding, but I was done with being scared or guilty. I looked them both in the eyes and said, "I'm moving out." Silence. My mom just stared at the table, and Bill actually laughed, like it was some big joke. He shook his head and said, "You think you're ready to live on your own? You barely even know how to manage yourself here." That stung, but I didn't let it show. I just said, "I've saved enough to cover the first few months' rent, and I found a place. I'm ready." Bill went off, calling me selfish, ungrateful, saying I was abandoning my family. He even threw in this line about how Max looks up to you, you know? As if that was supposed to keep me chained to this toxic mess. My mom, on the other hand, just kept muttering things like family sticks together and you'll regret this. But I wasn't budging. I packed up everything I owned that night. My mom came into my room once while I was packing and tried to make small talk, offering me some of the old pots and pans. We barely spoke about anything real. It was like she couldn't even admit this was actually happening. By morning, I was ready to leave, and when I walked out that door, I felt a mix of relief and sadness. It was hard, but I knew I was doing the right thing for me. When I finally locked the door to my new apartment, I felt this weird mix of freedom and fear. For the first time, I could breathe without worrying about Bill's moods or Ryan's messes. I could come and go as I pleased, eat when I wanted, and just exist. That first night was rough. The place was tiny, and the silence felt strange. But little by little, I settled in, and I realized I was finally free from the constant stress of that house. I'd finally reached my breaking point, and honestly, I'm glad I did. It was the push I needed to get out and start living my own life, even if it meant leaving my so-called family behind. Once I moved out, I thought things would get better. And they did in a way. I was finally free of the drama, the constant blaming, and the whole, "you're not really one of us" vibe that I'd been putting up with for years. I was living paycheck to paycheck in a tiny apartment, balancing work and school, but at least I was doing it on my own terms. No more Ryan trashing my stuff, no more Bill's lectures about responsibility, and no more cold stares from my mom when I didn't bend over backward to make them happy. But then, out of nowhere, I get this phone call from my mom. She hadn't reached out in months. Not a, "Hey, how's it going?" or even a basic, "Are you alive?" So I knew something was up the second I saw her name on my screen. I figured she wanted something, maybe help with Max or some family event they wanted me to show up for. But nope, this call was on a whole new level of messed up. She starts off with the fake sweetness she always uses when she's about to drop some bad news, like I wouldn't see right through it. "Hey, honey, just wanted to check in," she said, as if we'd been talking every week. After some awkward small talk, she gets to the point. "So, Bill has been thinking about his will," she starts, trailing off like she's expecting me to fill in the blanks. I just stayed silent, waiting for her to continue, even though I already had a bad feeling about where this was headed. Then she says, all casually, "Well, he's decided that it makes the most sense to leave everything to Ryan and Max. You know, because they're his biological kids." She says this like it's the most logical, reasonable thing in the world, like I'd just nod and go, "Oh yeah, of course." But honestly, I was speechless. I mean, it wasn't like I expected to get much from Bill, but hearing it spelled out like that just hit me. It was like the last nail in the coffin. After years of putting up with their crap, here was the final message. I wasn't really family to them. I took a deep breath and said, "Okay, sure, if that's what he wants." I kept my voice calm, but inside I was furious. It wasn't even about the money. It was the fact that, after all those years living under the same roof, all the times I put up with their nonsense, I was still seen as the extra kid, the outsider. My mom tried to smooth it over, saying, "You know it doesn't change how we feel about you, right?" Yeah, because this was all about feelings, and not the fact that they just outright told me I wasn't family when it mattered. The thing that really got me was how my mom tried to act like she was just delivering practical news, as if this was just some minor family update. I wanted to tell her how messed up it was, how much it hurt to be brushed aside like that, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. This was just who they were. Bill, the guy who never wanted me around. Ryan, the golden child, and my mom, too busy playing family with her new husband to care about her own kid. After that, I kept my distance even more. I didn't visit, didn't check in. I was focused on my own life, trying to keep my head above water. I'd worked hard for every single dollar I had. I was juggling 2 jobs while going to school full-time, living off instant noodles, and washing my clothes at the laundromat. It was rough, but it was my life, and I didn't owe them anything. I started making my own family with friends who actually cared about me, people who didn't see me as an outsider. I'll never forget the day I got the call about Uncle Steve's inheritance. It had been a few months since I'd last spoken to my mom after she laid out that whole not part of the will crap. Since then, I'd been living my life, trying to make ends meet without stressing about them or their messed up version of family. I wasn't expecting any surprises, that's for sure. But out of nowhere, this lawyer calls me, some guy I'd never heard of, with news that left me totally stunned. "Am I speaking with Emma Turner?" he asked, all professional. I nearly hung up, thinking it was some scam, but something about his tone made me pause. "Yes, this is Emma," I replied, already suspicious. And then he drops it. "I'm reaching out regarding the estate of your uncle Stephen Turner. I'm very sorry to inform you that he passed away recently. I barely knew Uncle Steve. He was one of those distant relatives you'd only see at holidays once in a blue moon. I mean, I couldn't even remember the last time we spoke. I think I was still a kid back then. So hearing that he'd passed away, yeah, it was sad, but it wasn't like it hit me super hard. What did hit me hard was what the lawyer said next. He went on, saying that Uncle Steve had left me everything in his will. Like, all of it. The guy I barely knew had decided that I should inherit his estate. At first, I thought I must have misheard him. I was just standing there, clutching my phone, replaying his words in my head. "Excuse me," I said, "but did you say he left everything to me?" "Yes, Emma," he confirmed. "Your uncle named you as the sole beneficiary of his estate. He explained that Uncle Steve didn't have kids, wasn't super close to anyone else in the family, and had apparently felt that I was worth something? I don't know. It was surreal. He went on to tell me that Uncle Steve's estate wasn't just a small amount either. He'd built up a serious amount of wealth over the years. We're talking a house, some investments, and a solid trust fund. Suddenly, I wasn't just scraping by anymore. I had real financial security. The whole time the lawyer was talking, I was just stunned, trying to process what I was hearing. I had questions, but I didn't even know where to start. Why me? What had Uncle Steve seen in me that made him think, yeah, that's the person I want to leave my life's work to? This guy was practically a stranger, but somehow he'd decided that I was worthy of his entire estate. The lawyer ended by telling me Uncle Steve had left a letter for me, and he'd be sending it along with all the paperwork. I didn't know what to think. Here I was, some random kid who'd been kicked around by life and treated like crap by my so-called family, and now I was about to inherit everything from an uncle I barely remembered. At first, I kept it all to myself. I didn't tell anyone, especially not my mom or Bill. I knew exactly how that would go. They'd sniff out money faster than a bloodhound and come running, trying to reconnect, or more likely, guilt-trip me into sharing it with them. But secrets like that don't stay hidden for long, and pretty soon, people started finding out. The first call came from my mom, which didn't surprise me. She acted all sweet, asking how I was doing and making small talk. Then she dropped the act and got to the point. "So, I heard about your Uncle Steve's inheritance," she said, trying to sound casual. "That's a lot of responsibility, honey. You know, with Max's school fees and Bill's health being what it is, we could really use some help." I just listened, letting her talk herself out. She went on about how family supports each other, throwing in all the usual lines she used to guilt me into things when I was younger. I could feel myself getting angry, but I kept it cool. When she finally finished her pitch, I told her, "Mom, I'm not giving you any money." Simple as that. She went silent for a second, and then she exploded. She called me selfish, saying I didn't appreciate everything she'd done for me. "You wouldn't have anything if it weren't for this family," she snapped. It was insane. She was trying to take credit for an inheritance I'd received from a guy she barely knew and probably didn't even care about. After I hung up, I sat there, just numb. The whole situation was insane. They hadn't given a damn about me until now, but the second they caught a whiff of money, suddenly they were family. My phone blew up over the next few days. Bill left me this long voicemail about how I was being unfair and tearing the family apart. Even Ryan messaged me, acting all buddy-buddy, like we'd been close or something, hinting that he could use a little help to get back on his feet. I was tired of their manipulation, their selfishness, and their complete lack of respect for my boundaries. They hadn't been there for me when I needed them, and I wasn't about to hand over my future to people who treated me like an ATM. When the lawyer finally sent over Uncle Steve's letter, I wasn't sure what to expect. But reading it, man, that letter hit me hard. Uncle Steve wrote about how he'd seen himself in me. He talked about how he'd grown up feeling like an outsider, too. How he admired my independence and determination. He said he wanted me to use his money to create a life I could be proud of, to break free from people who didn't value me. It was like he saw right through everything I'd been dealing with, even though we barely knew each other. That letter made me realize that I wasn't just lucky. I was given a chance to finally escape the toxic cycle my so-called family had dragged me into. Uncle Steve might have been distant, but he'd seen something in me, something even my own mom never cared about. I wasn't about to waste that. After reading his letter, I decided to take control of my life for real. I bought a small place, just a modest little house I could call my own. For the first time, I had real security, and I wasn't going to throw that away on people who only wanted to use me. I started planning my future, investing the rest of the inheritance wisely. I talked to a financial advisor, got my ducks in a row, and started mapping out the kind of life I wanted to live. And yeah, the calls and messages eventually slowed down when they realized I wasn't budging. I didn't regret a thing. Uncle Steve's inheritance wasn't just money, it was freedom. Freedom from guilt, from manipulation, from people who'd never actually cared about me. I had a fresh start, and for the first time, I wasn't held back by my family's drama. Letting go of them wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I had a chance to live life on my own terms, and I wasn't about to waste it. Final update. I thought cutting off my mom, Bill, and Ryan after the whole inheritance mess would finally be the end of it. I was prepared to go fully no contact, block them, live my life in peace. I had my own place now, was finally doing things for myself, and wasn't looking over my shoulder every time my phone buzzed, wondering what new demand or guilt trip they'd try to pull. I was done. Or at least, I thought I was. Turns out these people were just getting started. A couple of weeks after I shut them down and refused to share Uncle Steve's inheritance, my mom reaches out again. This time, it's not a phone call, but a text. It says something like, "Let's meet up. We need to have a real talk." For the family, she even threw in a little "love you" at the end, which, yeah, didn't exactly sit well given everything that had gone down. But a part of me was curious. Maybe she'd finally realized how messed up everything was and was ready to apologize? Spoiler, I was way too hopeful. So I agreed to meet her, but only in a public place. We picked a coffee shop close to my new place. And when I walked in, I could tell right away this wasn't going to be some heart-to-heart moment. She had that look, the one she always used to get when she was about to guilt me into doing something or pull some manipulation stunt. And right away, I knew she hadn't come to patch things up. This was going to be another ask. After a little small talk, where she barely asked anything about me or my life, she got straight to it. "Emma, this situation with Uncle Steve's inheritance has been really hard on all of us." She paused, looking at me like she expected me to nod along. I just kept a neutral face, waiting for her to get to the point. Then she says, "With everything going on, Max's private school fees, Bill's health, the house needing repairs, we're struggling. Really struggling." I just nodded, waiting for it, because I knew where this was going. But she kept pushing. "You're family, Emma, and family helps each other. We did our best to raise you, and it's only fair you help us out now that you've got some financial stability." I could feel my blood boiling. Here she was, acting like they'd been this supportive, loving family my whole life, like they hadn't been pushing me aside, letting Ryan wreck my stuff, and cutting me out of any plans unless they could use me for something. And now that I was finally on my feet, they were here, hands out, expecting me to just hand over everything. It was unreal. She kept going on about how a little help could go a long way for them, how they were thinking of upgrading the house, even how she and Bill were considering a vacation to ease the stress they'd been under lately. A vacation. After all this. She wanted me to pay for a vacation for her and the guy who'd made my life hell. I couldn't take it anymore. I cut her off and said, "Mom, just be straight with me. What are you asking for?" She looked me dead in the eyes and, without missing a beat, said, "I expect you to write me a check for $1 million. $1 million. Like I was just sitting on piles of cash ready to hand over. I actually laughed out loud. Couldn't help it. It was just that insane. "Excuse me?" I said, practically choking on my coffee. But she didn't even flinch. She looked right at me and said, "Well, it's only fair. Technically, that money should have gone to me since Steve was your father's brother. It should have been ours." She said it so calmly, so entitled, like I was just supposed to nod along and hand her a massive check because she felt like she deserved it. I looked her straight in the eyes and said, "Mom, I'm not giving you $1 million. I'm not giving you any money." Her expression went from entitled to furious in about 2 seconds flat. She started going off, calling me ungrateful, selfish, saying I was turning my back on my family. She went on and on, twisting everything to make me seem like the bad guy, like I was the one who'd somehow betrayed her. I just sat there, letting her rant. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore, so I put a $10 bill on the table for my coffee, got up, and left. She was still going on as I walked out, but I didn't look back. I was done with this crap. Done with her. Done with all of it. But of course, that wasn't the end of it. A few days later, I start hearing from other relatives. Suddenly, my phone is blowing up with texts and calls from cousins, aunts, and uncles, some I hadn't heard from in years. Apparently, my mom had been telling everyone that I stole the inheritance, that I was refusing to share what was rightfully hers. She made me out to be this greedy, heartless monster who'd cut off her own family for money. The hypocrisy was unreal. Where were these people when I was struggling, trying to make it on my own? Where were they when I was getting kicked around at home, living as the outsider in my own family? Nowhere. But now that there was money involved, suddenly they all had opinions. I didn't even bother responding to most of them. I was tired of explaining myself to people who hadn't given a damn about me until there was something to gain. But then I got a message from Bill. He sent me this long, guilt-trippy text going on about family values and how I should be putting the family first. I replied with one sentence. Funny, you didn't consider me family when you wrote me out of your will. I thought that would be the end of it, but they went nuclear. A week later, I got a letter in the mail. An official-looking one. My mom was actually suing me. Yup, she'd hired a lawyer, or at least pretended to, and was trying to take me to court for a fair share of the inheritance. I couldn't believe it. My own mother was dragging me to court over money she had no right to. At first, I was scared, thinking I'd have to go through some ugly legal battle. But when I called my lawyer, he just laughed and said, "This case has no legs." Turns out, her lawyer was barely legit and didn't have a single solid argument. My mom had thrown everything at the wall to see what would stick, but there was nothing there. That lawsuit was the last straw. They'd tried guilt-tripping me, manipulating me, even taking legal action, all for money they never earned, money they didn't deserve. I blocked their numbers, unfollowed every relative who'd given me grief, and just moved on. Looking back, that inheritance wasn't just financial freedom. It was an escape. Uncle Steve gave me a way out, a way to cut myself off from these people who only saw me as a paycheck. I didn't need their approval or their version of family anymore. I'd finally found peace on my own terms.